Niger's coup leader has agreed to talks with the West African regional bloc ECOWAS. The decision follows talks with a group of Nigerian religious scholars in Niger's capital, Niamey. The visit comes as efforts intensify to restore civilian rule in Niger following the coup last month. The leader of the delegation, Bala Lau, says those talks could begin very soon.
After going over there and meeting with them, we talked about how both counties need each other and how they have been relating for many years. We talked about how our culture and religion is the same. We won't allow a war to happen. The junta leader said he is happy with the talk of negotiations and agrees to it. He agreed for us to be the medium between his government and ECOWAS. He also said his government is open to sitting anywhere they are invited to sit and talk about negotiations. The junta leaders said they were not justly treated and given harsh judgment without a fair trial. He said as citizens of Niger, no one knows why they did what they did. He apologized to the Sultan of Sokoto and former head of state Abdul Salam Bakare for stopping them from entering the country. He said he did that because of the protest happening in Niger at the time, which could have caused them harm if they entered, and it would then be blamed on him.
All right, Rufai, Niger military junta ready for dialogue.
So I saw this coming, and I'm excited it has happened, that they have finally decided to talk. A couple of weeks ago, I think we said here constantly that I don't see the junta, holding out for that long when the sanction had kicked in. The economic situation of people was not good, and the fact that you have a group of coup plotters that were not ready to talk, that's almost impossible because of the cultural ties, and they were still going to crack at a point. And we also saw the protest in Kano over the weekend. We also saw what happened. We also saw the conversations. And this is sort of like the cultural symbolism between Nigeria and Niger. That yes, ECOWAS might have taken a hard line, which to a very large extent, I thought ECOWAS was just showing that to say that if you don't behave, we can definitely use force. But I'm not sure it will have been in good life for ECOWAS to use force against a fellow ECOWAS member. And that continued for a while, and the coup plotters held out until this conversation. But once the Sanusi conversation went through last week, I knew they had softened their position, and now they are ready to talk. So it's time for ECOWAS to go in there, send their negotiators in, and probably look at the possibility of what they can get. Probably it's going to be a transition to civilian government. They might not want Bazoum on the cards any longer, because this same Tijani knows Bazoum in and out. And he was the one that stopped a coup against Bazoum before the inauguration in the first place. So how come allies have suddenly started a fight between Bazoum and this Tijani? So when you look at it critically, they might probably not want Bazoum on the cards, and the best bet would be a transition back to civilian governments in about a year or two thereabout, or whatever the time frame they set. And to a large extent, things are looking a lot better as regards the conversation, and the good state is that we have conquered this. So probably we can now use this and focus on our own internal problems, like the killings in Plateau,
yes,
which is a big problem, like the Sheila boys that are rampaging at Damawa, hurting a lot of people, and the state of our economy that is going down.
The Council of Ulama, as you would recall, was one of those groups that met with President Tinubu just before the meeting, the second extraordinary summit of ECOWAS heads of state and government took place. And their advice at that time, that group was led by Sheikh Dawiru Bauchi, was that Nigeria should not get involved in any kind of military intervention in Niger. As well as other groups, of course, that approached the president, the CAN, the Afenifere, the other groups in Uriwa, Human Rights, of West Africa group, and also others like Senator Shehu Sani, The latest person to put a word in there is the former governor of Jigawa State, Alhaji Sule Lamido, and a host of others who thought, look, given the circumstances as described by all the stakeholders, that Nigeria should adopt the option of diplomacy, even as Nigeria is leading ECOWAS with our president as chairman. Now, this latest development is a twist in the tail, because before now, as General Chiani of Niger himself admitted, he had been snubbing delegation from Nigeria, and he apologized through the Muslim leaders who went to see him, and the Prime Minister then, that, well, he apologized. Well, that's an interesting development, but that apology through the clerics, the Muslim leaders that went to meet him, I don't think is enough. Maybe the diplomatic way to do it is to send a delegation to President Tinubu so as to kickstart a process of negotiation. But he made one point, though. He said, he decided to snub all the delegations coming because nobody tried to hear their own side of the story. And, that would justify the position of persons who have been saying, well, diplomacy should have come before the imposition of a deadline. So that's an instructive part of it there. And in any case, he made a point that the action that they have taken is a collective action. However, the residual point is that military interventions are no longer popular, which I'm sure is a point that will have been made clearly to General Chiani and the Prime Minister of Niger, the newly appointed Prime Minister of Niger. So what will now be on the table? What will be the outcome of the diplomatic negotiation? Are they going to reinstate President Bazoum? Would that happen? It will be difficult to imagine that. 2, are they going to agree on a transition program? Would that be acceptable to the ECOWAS leaders? 3, are they going to give the coup leaders in Niger some kind of safe passage out of power? And then how do you deal with the other dimensions? But I guess that, if steps are taken to further negotiate, then we'll see. And we hope that these, Muslim clerics who met with the coup plotters, coup leaders in Niger, that truly, as they said, they had the endorsement of President Tinubu, and that they will report back to him. Now, reporting back to him is not enough. He himself will have to cascade that to the other leaders of ECOWAS. And maybe ECOWAS will have a third extraordinary summit, which may probably be attended by representatives from the other side. But this looks, from the way it is reported, as some kind of progress. And the role that these non-state actors, have managed to play to move the needle a little bit. But whatever it is, there is no justification for the military intervention, as everyone who commented on it again this morning, Alhaji Sule Lamido, who says that President Tinubu now, at this point, needs to involve former heads of state and president of Nigeria. And I made this same point last week, that the Council of State is there. Since we don't have a Minister of Foreign Affairs, we don't have a council advising the president on international affairs. There used to be a standing body chaired by seasoned diplomats, retired diplomats. They will need to reconstitute that body so that in this kind of situation, the president can be properly protected by persons who have institutional memory and who understand, the nitty-gritty of it, not some special advisor behaving like this is student union politics. No, it's international diplomacy, which is the point former governor of Jigawa State, Alhaji Sule Lamido, was making.
Absolutely. Great signal, great news this morning with regards to the update on Niger, Republic of Niger, especially because, of course, a number of Nigerians, notable personalities, had spoken against or kicked against the possibility of going to war in Niger. That's Nigeria, Niger, or ECOWAS, but Nigeria being a very key figure in that particular war. Before we come to some sort of agreement or diplomatic dialogue ensues between ECOWAS and Niger, I believe there's some pertinent lessons to learn from how this particular situation has been handled so far. I mean, over the weekend, we'd gotten reports of some countries who had also quite covertly kicked against the idea of war, and the fact that Nigerians had come, a number of analysts, having looked at the situation, have said we're not in a position at the moment to afford that kind of intervention. And so, going back to the genesis of how we got to where we are today, it's following the first extraordinary ECOWAS summit amongst the heads of state and governments in this particular region, chaired by the president of Nigeria, where, despite the fact that they had instituted sanctions against Niger, also almost simultaneously had also said there was going to be military action in Niger, which the military junta in the meeting with the clerics, Islamic clerics, had said was one of the trigger points for them for closing their doors to any form of dialogue and diplomacy, because already ECOWAS had come in with hard force, as opposed to, first of all, dialogue, first of all, approaching it diplomatically, and then, if in the event that fails, move on to a threat of military action. Big lessons there when it comes to foreign relations. And again, perhaps the president, being chair of ECOWAS, can be forgiven, if possible, for that, because, or maybe even a lesson learned, as has been said, any special advisor or anyone advising on diplomacy, any Minister of Foreign Affairs currently sitting, not at all. Decisions like this, announcements like this should go through processes. And I believe that in terms of looking at the style of the president so far, there are in many ways an opportunity to avoid announcements that haven't been clearly thought out without proper and full procedure analysis of the action before it is announced. I think that's a big lesson, not just for in the Niger situation, but for Nigeria as a whole. Not until people started coming out, there were protests in Kano, a few, even in Niger, people protesting, going back to the relationship that Nigeria enjoys with Niger, the impact on the northern states bordering Niger, the impact on Nigeria wider, the diversion of main issues that we're contending with currently. These are some of the things that came up post that announcement. So again, like I mentioned, lessons to be learned. Looking forward to a dialogue occurring between ECOWAS and Niger, and of course, it producing substantial results. If I want to say something.
Yeah, so I want to say just something real quickly. In all fairness to President Tinubu, in all fairness, he did reach out to the Nigerian coup plotters. You see, when the coup plotters are now saying that it was because they didn't hear their side of the story at first, that's a lie. President Talon of Benin was sent in first, in all fairness, and they rebuffed everything. What they are doing now is what they call, Yorubas will call Awawi. They are just looking for things to say, in all fairness to President Tinubu. Yes, other decisions where I didn't support them, like the post on military and all that, but in all fairness, he reached out at first and they rebuffed it. I just wanted to make that clear as we move on.
All right, we'll move on to our next story this morning. The overseer of the Citadel Global Community Church and former presidential aspirant, Tunde Bakare, says the continued detention of the suspended governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria is nothing but President Tinubu's political vendetta. Speaking in his State of the Nation address, Pastor Bakare warns that Nigeria is regressing forcefully in what he calls a frantic race to the bottom. Bakare describes Tinubu's presidential style as leadership by impulse and condemns the so-called Emilokon politics. He also highlights the need to restore faith in a united Nigeria.
First and foremost, I'm a stakeholder in this nation because I'm a citizen. And so our other citizens who had gone through all kinds of ups and downs due to the policies of the current government. The one that was very worrisome to me is what I describe as impulse leadership. Just speak now and then try to work out things later. That was what happened with the subsidy issue. Now, we have never at any time, including the Save Nigeria group that I convened, we had never been in support of subsidy. We wanted it removed, but at the same time, we wanted corruption dealt with. Most of the issues today, even President Bola Tinubu acknowledged that money had gone into wrong hands and they were just lining up the pockets of a few elites. So if you know these people, go after them and don't punish Nigerians for it. Kill corruption and not Nigerians. That was the issue there. The same impulse style of leadership occurred with the way, rather than going by way of peace and by way of negotiation.
Well, former presidential aspirant, he was one of the runners in the APC presidential primaries, Pastor Tunde Bakare, and also very outspoken, has given a State of the Nation address. Rufai, your take on this?
Truth has to be said.
Israel and the Amorites. Read the next line for me.
What's going on? I subscribe totally to most of the things there that Mr. Tunde Bakare said. Number one, he talked about government on impulse. Yes, we have talked about that. The policies on the Naira, real impulse. You see the problem we're having now. Could we have thought through that properly? Now we have nothing to defend the Naira. Look at how much the Naira slumped. Today now, some marketers are talking about 720 Naira per litre. That's another one. What were the things we called for before removal of subsidies? At least make the local refineries work, fix a lot, and look at the corruption that really pervades the system. Nothing was done. It was just on impulse. President Tinubu himself has come out to say that he was the one that decided to announce that because his advisors told him not to. Many other factors. Look at the ministerial list. 48 ministers. We're complaining cost of governance. 48 ministers. The highest. Anyway, subject to the confirmation of 3. One has said it was already put up, but it's probably going to put a replacement there. I mean, look at the general play of the economy. There's more hardship on the lives of the people. And also, this political vendetta against Mr. Emefiele. They are pulling the CBN governor. But you forget that it was your friend and compatriot, President Muhammadu Buhari, that was head of state. And head of state, all the decisions go through the head of state. You can't do anything without the CBN. I mean, without the head of state, we have seen that too many times play out. You remember when we want to denominate currency? Yes. Under Yaradua's time, that CBN governor then, I think Mr. Soludo, went through all of the process. And at the end, Yaradua told him it's not possible. So everything only passes through with the CBN. The 33 trillion we saw, as regards ways and means, money printing and all of that. Which government did they use to print money? Was it not President Muhammadu Buhari's government? Wasn't he aware of that? When we were breaking the law, and we kept on shouting it here, that you can't print more than a certain threshold of your last year's revenue. Wasn't President Buhari aware of that? The CBN report they've not printed out in a while. If we had President Buhari that kicked on it and said, oh, there must be accountability, wouldn't have been the order of the day. Didn't we see how President Buhari had to force the lawmakers to help him securitize ways and means, which means breaking the CBN Act? Didn't we see that? So the question is, Mr. Emefiele is put in the dock. There are further investigations against him. What about the role the commander-in-chief also played in all of this? I mean, these are the questions we're asking.
Dr. Wati?
Well, it was truly a State of the Nation address. And I think that Pastor Bakare has discharged an important obligation. You will recall that on this program, when the fuel subsidy was removed, just like that, fuel subsidy is gone. We refer to the protests in Ojota in 2012, and there was a video that was shown, an old video, reminding everyone of the people that gathered in Ojota. And I recall that one of the things I said, look, some of those people who protested when subsidy was partially removed, we didn't call it removal of subsidy, then we call it deregulation of the downstream sector. They are still alive. And I recall that the name of Pastor Tunde Bakare was mentioned. Now he has addressed in a State of the Nation address many of the issues. Now, what is he saying? He's talking about vice, virtue, and time. 3 things that never stand still. That was his theme. And what are some of his conclusions that people cannot disagree with, in a sense? 1, he says that under President Tinubu, Nigeria is on a downward slope. And that this is because actions are not properly thought through, and it seems to be leading by impulse. And he gave 2 examples, 2 major examples. 1, he said the thoughtless removal of fuel subsidy. his words. Second, he said putting military action before diplomacy in Niger. He cited those two examples, and I guess there will be many that will agree with them. And he also said, for the public to be able to breathe, that President Tinubu has to kill corruption, that he has to address corruption. For the people to breathe, there must be economic reform agenda that works. But that economic reform agenda must be combined with what he calls economic justice. Economic justice simply means putting the people first. He talked about neoliberal policies. He says neoliberalism does not mean you have to expand the cost of governance. And that was when he talked about a 48 large, cabinet. And that, look, that doesn't seem to make sense at all. You can't keep expanding governance and increasing costs, and you say you are governing. 5, he said Emilokon is a prescription for what he calls an imperial presidency. Actually, there's a book titled Imperial Presidency, but the sense in which, Pastor Bakare is using it is that kind of presidency that is just there for ego purposes, rather than the imperial nature of the presidency itself in certain jurisdictions. I'm sure he knows the difference. Now, he also made a point about vendetta, criminal impunity, using the position of government to victimize people. And that was when he referred to Emefiele. And he reminded everyone that during the election, or during the campaigns, President Tinubu had complained, he was a candidate then, about Emefiele's Naira redesign policy. And that on the surface of it, this would look like an attempt to get back at Mr. Godwin Emefiele. Where the matter is in court. It's for the court to determine the merits or demerits of it. But truly, there are many Nigerians who hold grudges against Emefiele because of that particular policy, because they thought it imposed hardship on them. But it was state policy in any case, not a personal policy. Finally, he, a member of the APC, because I think Pastor Bakare is a member of the APC, reminded everyone, and this will gladden the hearts of the opposition, that in fact APC could not have won that election, that APC would have lost convincingly if the PDP was not split down the middle, bifurcated into PDP, Labour Party, and what is it again? The G5. But that he thought, that was what made the APC to win. So what we have seen here is how Pastor Tunde Bakare has turned his State of the Nation platform in his church into an opportunity to speak truth to power and to speak to the heart of the matter. And I was very pleased, seeing that sermon, and he made one final point, that he hopes that the people in government will at least take a look at what he has said, his suggestions, because I've been waiting to see a response. In typical fashion, one over-enthusiastic media aide will have fired a statement to abuse Pastor Bakare. I haven't seen that yet. I hope nobody will go in that direction. I hope they will just take that sermon, take it as, the contribution by a concerned citizen who also has a right to contribute to a public discourse.
Oh, Dr. Bati, they've started to respond.
They have started?
Yes, some through television interviews,
okay.
And some. So I'm sure definitely they wouldn't keep quiet. Even if it's not a formal media aid, I expect that loyalists too, there's still some positions to be occupied, will come out in full force to speak about how, and just dissect that particular State of Nation address. But as already been said, Pastor Tunde Bakare stated in many instances the obvious. What Nigerians have talked about, what Nigerians have complained about, including the obvious disobedience to the rule of law, disregard for the rule of law, especially in the case of Mr. Emefiele's case, and Mr. Rashid Bauer, let's not forget that. He had talked about the sufferings of the people, his stance on fuel subsidy, and the fact that even until now, despite some announcements being made in the form of palliatives or ways to cushion the effects of subsidy, we haven't seen anything quite tangible to make a meaningful difference in the lives of Nigeria. In fact, we've been so distracted by the Niger situation that it almost seems as if all is well at home, and so we can face what's going on in another nation. And Nigerians are still suffering. We have people who are still still walking long distances because they just cannot afford to drive their cars anymore. We have people who cannot afford to eat 2 times a day. I was going to say 3 times a day, but that was almost long forgotten, sadly. So once a day, some people are just managing to do that. I'll share a very quick observation. Over the weekend, or in the last week, one of the churches, the Redeemed Christian Church of God, had its convention, and they had an unprecedented number of people attend. And in observing what was going on, one of the things that someone highlighted was that during that week, they give free food. So some parents literally came to drop their children just for an opportunity to get food to eat. That is where we are currently as a nation. And we have a government. We have a government that's in full force, and yet we have people who are hungry, who would take on desperate measures. I mean, that was a good instance, but in other instances, people will resort to crime. People will resort to other instances just to make ends meet and just to survive for one day. These are the issues that we're currently facing in the nation. Beyond that, a quick analysis of some of the key defining moments of this particular administration in the first 60 days. Number one, the removal of subsidy, flawed. Unification of Naira, flawed. We are hitting almost 1,000 Naira to $1 of the exchange rates. Look at the response to Niger crisis, flawed. We still talked about that a few minutes ago. So we need to, again, look at perhaps the decision-making process, policy-making process of this current administration and examine shortcomings. Consultations has to be had. Advisors have to be listened to. And when people like Pastor Tunde Bakare speak, it shouldn't always come from a lamentation or criticism point of view, but look at the merit of what he has advocated for. It's not new. A number of Nigerians have spoken, but we hope that this voice would lend some power to what is already being suffered by Nigerians.